working at the cotton mill. You need a good woman.
Hi. In contemporary American television, masculinity is often depicted in extremes. It's either hyperbolic violence or parodic incompetence. Animated sitcoms, in particular, have made a tradition out of portraying male characters who are foolish, emotionally unavailable, or dangerously overconfident. But King of the Hill, which aired from 1997 to 2010 with a recent revival season, offers something different. An exploration of masculinity that is neither celebratory nor satirical, but anthropological. The series functions as what cultural theorist Raymond Williams might call a structure of feeling, a lived, historically situated model of Texan male identity and transition. This essay argues that King of the Hill presents masculinity not as an ideology, but as a practice, one shaped by generational trauma, labor identity, regional norms, and emerging cultural shifts at the turn of the century. Through characters like Hank, Bobby, Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer, the show constructs masculinity as stewardship, obligation, and emotional negotiation. Hank Hill is emblematic of what sociologist R.W. Connell famously termed hegemonic masculinity, a culturally dominant model that emphasizes competence, stoicism, heterosexuality, and control. Hank's attachment is to propane and propane accessories, his lawn, and his job as assistant manager at Strickland Propane, all of which reveal a masculine identity grounded in mastery over one's domain. These attachments are not trivial, they reflect an ethic of responsibility that sociologist Michael Kimmel describes as the marketplace man, the man defined by what he produces, provides, and controls. But King of the Hill complicates this. Hank's stoicism emerges from the violence of his upbringing, most notably his relationship with his father, World War II veteran Cotton Hill, a living embodiment of World War II militarized masculinity. Cotton represents what cultural historian George Moses calls the hard man, emotionally invulnerable, physically resilient, and disdainful of softness. Hank's masculinity, then, is not a universal model, but a coping mechanism, a way to maintain dignity in a world where feeling is dangerous and vulnerability punished. The show does not glamorize this model. An episode such as Be True to Your Fool, To Kill a Ladybird, or Hank's Bully, Hank's emotional limitations are often the source of conflict and personal growth in the end. His rigidity is not presented as natural, but learned, not ideal, but improvable. If Hank embodies hegemonic masculinity, Bobby represents what Connell adds subordinated. If Hank embodies hegemonic masculinity, his son Bobby represents what Connell calls subordinated masculinities, forms of masculinity and male identity that deviate from the dominant ideal. Bobby is expressive, intuitive, he's emotionally literate, and interested in activities, comedy, cooking, theater, that challenge traditional text and gender norms. In cultural theory, Bobby aligns with what Eric Anderson identifies as inclusive masculinity, a masculinity that allows emotional expression without shame. The tension between Hank and Bobby forms the emotional core of the series, at least in its original run. Hank fears Bobby will not survive the demands of hegemonic masculinity, but Bobby demonstrates that survival is possible without reproducing that system. Notably, King of the Hill does not allow Bobby to be merely a comedic foil. His flexibility, kindness, and creativity often make him the moral superior to the rigid adults around him. His masculinity is not a subversion, it's an evolution. The alley, which so many of the scenes take place in, including the title scene, offers a tableau of what Kimmel calls masculinity as homosocial enactment, men performing masculinity for one another. Each of Hank's friends represents a distinct masculine pathology, illustrating that masculinity is not a singular identity, but a field of competing performances. First, we have Dale Gribble, the paranoid masculine. Dale exemplifies what scholars call defensive masculinity, a masculinity organized around suspicion, conspiracy, and control. His obsession with government intrusion reveals anxieties about loss of authority, echoing sociologist Judith Stacy's work on the post-patriarchal crisis. Then we have Bill Dauterive, the wounded masculine. Bill represents the consequences of emotional isolation. His depression, loneliness, and lack of self-worth embody what Bell Hooks describes as the psychic self-mutilation. Men endure what's socialized to avoid vulnerability. Bill is not emasculated, he is unparented emotionally. And finally, we have Boomhauer, the hypermasculine confidence without depth. Boomhauer is attractive, articulate in arguably his own way, and socially competent. Yet his relationships are all shallow. He reflects what gender theorists call ornamental masculinity, a masculinity defined by aesthetics rather than interiority. His charm masks a lack of intimacy, revealing a hollowness behind the archetype. Together, the alley men illustrate a fragmented masculine ecosystem, each struggling with the limitations of their respective models. Then we have Hank's wife, Peggy Hill. Peggy functions as a counterpoint to traditional gender scripts. Her confidence, ambition, and self-assurance, despite her occasional incompetence, complicate the gender binary embedded in Hank's worldview. Peggy embodies what Judith Butler calls the performativity of gender, the idea that gender is not inherent, but enacted. Her masculine code traits expose the arbitrariness of Hank's gender expectations, revealing that decisiveness, confidence, and professional aspiration are not inherently masculine. They are human competencies. Peggy's presence destabilizes Hank's assumptions and forces the narrative to confront gender as fluid rather than fixed. The show's setting, Arlen, Texas, matters. Regional identity plays a major role in shaping masculine norms. So scholars such as Dana Nelson and Richard Slotkin argue that American masculinity has long been tied to frontier mythology, the ideal of the self-reliant, land-owning, and capable man. In Hank's world, mowing the lawn, grilling with propane, fixing one's own home, and being a handyman are not hobbies, but rituals of masculine legitimacy. These practices reflect what anthropologist Pierre Bourdieu might call habituous, the embodied dispositions inherited from one's own social environment. Arlen's masculinity is not a universal model, but a local one, rooted in Southern sensibilities, post-industrial labor precarity, and a consumer economy that still clings to the dignity of manual skill. Across its run, King of the Hill makes a clear, coherent argument. Masculinity cannot be reduced to personality traits or cultural slogans. It is a form of ethical practice, an attempt to live with integrity, responsibility, and humility within a world of competing expectations. The show affirms certain virtues associated with masculinity, steadfastness, reliability, craftsmanship, but rejects the emotional repression and dominance that often accompany them. Hank Hill doesn't become a different man by the end of the series. He becomes a more capacious man. And Bobby doesn't abandon his softness, he simply learns where softness becomes strength. King of the Hill stands apart because it treats masculinity not as a stereotype or a crisis, but as a lived, evolving tradition. It offers a masculinities studies framework wrapped in the aesthetics of small-town Texas comedy. In doing so, it accomplishes something rare for a series. It portrays masculinity as both valuable and revisable, rooted in tradition yet capable of change, and serious but never self-serious. The men of Arlen may spend most of their time standing in an alley, drinking beer, and saying little to nothing, but the show reveals that beneath their silence is an entire moral universe, negotiating what that means to be a man. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.